Okay, thank you for the introduction. And as well, every speaker has been represented, I'm the Trade Commissioner based in Paris. And we'll go in this order. I will speak about the European market in general, and then we'll have Anne Letourneau will give an example of how a private company has benefited from CETA, and then Maximo Hurtado, who's based at the Canadian Embassy in Madrid, will give some views about the Spanish market. If we can start with the presentation right now. Also a reminder that you can send your questions to the email address that appears on the right-hand side of your screen. The presentation, as I said, is how to grow your business in the European Union. And if we go to the next slide, we go straight to the subject with CETA. CETA was presented before CETA was enforced. It was presented in Canada as a major opportunity for Canadian exporters of agri-food and fishery products. I want to give some kind of details about that. Why was it a major opportunity? Because European imports of agri-food and fishery products were growing steadily. And also it was for these agriculture and agri-food products, tariffs were very high, well, ranging from 2% to 20%, sometimes 25% on some products. And on fishery products, very often you had something between 8 and 15%. Very high tariffs also on meats and processed products. So when CETA came, and CETA actually grants a duty-free access for most of agriculture and agri-food products, the duty-free access to the EU for Canadian products. So if we go to the next slide, we'll have, next slide, please. Yes, this is it shows how the EU imports agri-food products from the rest of the world. And over this period of time, which is 18 years, basically over 18 years, the EU imports of agri-food products, they have doubled. So it's not bad, and you can see that it's always an opportunity when a market is actually growing and imports are growing. It means that probably there's a good opportunity out there. So to the next slide, we can see how Canada was doing during these 18 years. And in fact, Canadian exports to the EU also doubled within these 18 years. But it was, I would say, less stable, less irregular growth. And there were some kind of disappointments, especially in 2018 when CETA came in and exports dropped. So it was kind of a shock. How come exports can drop when you have more access to a market? Well, fortunately, in 2019, exports grew again, and again in 2020, the first 9 months are very positive. In fact, we anticipate a very intense growth in 2020, maybe something like 25%, 30%. But I'll explain later why we have these irregular years. So if we go to the next slide, as I said before, we said CETA will provide Canadian agriculture with an advantage over competitors upon entry into force, as almost 94% of all EU agriculture tariff lines will become duty-free. And in fact, they did become duty-free. But well, we're talking agriculture and agri-food products, and there's other constraints beside tariffs. As I said, but CETA did not change the non-tariff barriers that were in place, and CETA does not change the regulations, the import rules. CETA did not take into consideration the competitive landscape. There are new exporters that also target the European market, for example, Ukraine and Belarus, Brazil and the US. And CETA did not take into consideration the buy local trend. which is very strong in Europe, especially in countries like France, Spain, Italy. CETA did not change the limited number of Canadian exporters of agricultural and agri-food products. There are not so many companies that want to tackle with overseas export. And also something that played not in favor of Canadian products is that the ratification process that is very lengthy and also takes a lot of time and sometimes back and forth because a country is hesitating to ratify CETA. It provided to those who wanted to say bad things about Canadian products, while it provided opportunities to bash Canadian agri-food products in Europe, and especially in France, in Italy, and other countries, maybe in the Netherlands too. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see where we had opportunities. Well, we had opportunities, especially these are the HS chapters and the European imports over the last 7 years. Well, we had better opportunities for these chapters where the growth of imports was important. And there are 2 chapters where the growth was very high. Chapter 3, so fishery products, and chapter 8, these are fruit. So fruit and seafood, well, the growth was intense. You could see that was maybe something between 10 and 15% every year. Now we have other chapters where the growth was somehow very interesting. Chapter 7, these are the vegetable. Chapter 10, these are wheat and cereals in general. And chapter 15, these are the oils, and chapter 22, beverages. And I just want to finish with some 2 chapters that, in fact, looks like the imports were stable. So maybe it was not such a great opportunity, although it was presented as such for some people. Chapter 2 is meats. Well, you can see the European imports of meats were not increasing. In fact, they were stable. And 16 is processed fishery products and processed meats. And again, in chapter 16, the growth was not there. So there was no growth, so probably less opportunity. So if we go to the next slide, we have an idea of what the EU was importing from Canada over these last 7 years. And we have 2 major chapters. Chapter 10 is cereal products, and especially durum wheat, that is going to Italy. And chapter 12 is oilseeds. Oilseeds are exported to France, the Netherlands, Portugal, Germany, a lot of destinations. But you could see these 2 circles, they show that it was a very irregular pattern. It was not exactly a growth, it was irregular years. This was mostly due because there was a demand in Europe when the European crop was not so good. So crops, they come and go. And sometimes there's a bad crop, sometimes there's a good crop. It means less international demand, it means less sales of these products to the EU. So if we look at the chapter 03, the fishery products, yes, definitely our sales to Europe, our fishery product sales to Europe were good. And then we have other chapters where the trend was very positive. Chapter 7, vegetable. Chapter 8, fruit. Chapter 20, cereal preparations. And also chapter 23, this is feed. There was one chapter which was a little bit disappointing. Chapter 16, these are processed meat, but in our case, it was mostly processed fishery products. So as you see, there was not exactly a good match between what we've seen in the former slide, where all these chapters where there was a growth in demand, and what Canada is able to supply to the EU. So if we go to the next slide, yes, now we have in this slide, these are the main European markets by member state, as we call them here in Europe. So our first market in Europe is Italy, and especially durum wheat. Second market is the UK, and then France, Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Spain, Ireland, Portugal, Denmark. So we definitely export to these major markets. If we go to the next slide, duties don't do everything. So the duty elimination don't do everything the same. Canada exported mostly agri-food products that were already imported in the EU on the duty-free basis. Oilseeds, just like canola, for example, soybeans, they were exported on a duty-free basis. So CETA does not change anything when you're talking about oilseeds and soybeans. It's the same for pulses. CETA actually provides a level playing field compared to competitors such as Ukraine, Belarus, Norway, Iceland, which is good, but it doesn't provide a level playing field with European competitors, which still have a kind of advantage. So it provides some help, and not a complete level playing field with all competitors. We had some issues such like a lack of interest in exporters. I mean, exporters that were interested in exporting overseas. And also we had competition with the Chinese market, because all of a sudden the Chinese market was growing very fast, especially in 2018, 2019. And it was a kind of booming market, and probably easier to tackle with than a series of national markets in the EU, because you could go to China and they'd probably sell a much larger volume or with only one country. So the first 2 years of CETA were a bit disappointing, especially the first year, 2018. Second year, as I said, was better, and 2020 looks very promising. Also, what we noticed is there are TRQs for some agricultural products and agri-food products in the CETA agreement, and the TRQ usage was very low, especially in 2018. There were several quotas which were not used at all. So it was a kind of disappointment. How come we have TRQs which are not used at all? And we had also, during these years, market access issues, especially in Italy. We had a country of origin labeling for durum wheat used as an ingredient in pasta products. But still, I would say we cannot avoid these market access issues. And as I said again, inconsistent demand depending on European crops, especially for canola and durum. So if we go to the next slide, we have also the challenges, especially for our category of products, our agriculture and agri-food products. The rules of origin for processed foods. We have an example afterwards, and it will show you how we have to get into details when you have a processed food that is made from imported ingredients. It is quite complicated to look into the rule of origin. And also the thing that Canadian industry is more integrated to the American industry than anticipated. So if the part, for example, if there's a part of the process that takes place in the US, because it's easier to have it processed in the US, then the product is not eligible to preferential treatment because some of the process took place out of Canada. Also, in the agri-food sector, there's a lot of SMEs, and it means probably lack of skill. Well, the skills that you need to export to the EU, you need a higher expertise than for exporting to the US. So it's more complicated for a smaller company. And industry sometimes is unaware of some dispositions of the agreement which are in its favor. For example, in lobster, some lobster products can be exported with the benefit of CETA, even though they are made from imported live lobster. So a company that processes lobsters can make lobster products from lobsters imported from the US, and still through the alternative origin quota or tariff rate quota, it will be able to use a special disposition to export these products with the preferential treatment. But when I talked to a lot of lobster processors, they were not aware of this disadvantage written in CETA. So it was a kind of a disappointment. Looks like the right people didn't know the right part of the agreement. And also, the challenges were the multiple export market for Canadian exporters, as I said, China, for example. And we had also a commercial challenge. In the EU, we have mature markets with heavy competition. All the world wants to sell to the EU. And while Canada is one supplier among others, there's not a major appeal of Canadian products, with some exceptions. But I would say Canada is not famous for its agriculture and agri-food products. And we have a low visibility and sometimes a poor reputation. So if we go to the next slides, in spite of all these challenges, it's a small part of the rules of origin. There were several presentations on the rules of origin by specialists yesterday, so I don't want to get into details, but if you have to be careful, especially for processed products, which are not 100% Canadian, they must satisfy the product-specific rule of origin. And if you cannot find it in the agreement, I'd be very pleased to explain it to you. And if we go to the next slide, because this is a bit too complicated, and this is a kind of table you need to get if you have a processed product. In this case, it's a chocolate cookie, and we had to go into details on each ingredient. We had to find the HS code and also the percentage of sugar contained in each of these ingredients. Why is it so? If we go to the next slide, we have an idea of what the rule of origin was for this chocolate cookie. And the chocolate cookie, that was kind of not tricky, but there were details in there, and especially the sugar content, the net weight of sugar should not exceed 40% of the net weight of the product. And I don't want to go back to the former slide, but we were in fact very close to the 40%. And so we didn't know. It was a shock to me because I thought the rule of origin was easily met. And in this case, once we got into the fine calculations with each ingredient, we were too close to the limit. And if we go to the next slide, this is an example. Next slide, please. Yes, this is an example of what we have to consider as sugar in these calculations. And if we get to the next slide, there's an explanation of what we could use instead of the standard rule of origin. We could use the alternative origin quota. And this there's a volume of product that is under this HS code, and for which there's an easier rule to be met. And in this case, it was much easier to meet. So we could use this alternative origin quota. So you see, it's not always obvious to use these rules of origin, but they have to be considered. If we get to the next slide, so where are our opportunities? Well, for commodities, the situation isn't changed for several of them. Canola and soya, as I said before, they were already duty-free, and the same for pulses and mustard seed. Now, for another commodity, a very important commodity, wheat, so durum and CWRS, there's a combination of phasing in and market situations. Sometimes there are duties, sometimes there's no duty at all. Especially when the European price for this commodity is high, there's no duty. So right now, in fact, there is no duty at all on wheat imported in the EU. But it could be some. And in this case, through CETA, there won't be any duty at all under all circumstances after the phasing-in period. So we're in the middle of the phasing-in period. So with 4 more years, we'll be granted permanent duty-free access for wheat, and it will be the same for barley and oats. Canola, well, as I said, the situation isn't changed, but there's an evolution of your European production in there. Well, there've been very unfavorable climate conditions in France and Germany, which are the two major producers of canola. And because in the EU they're phasing out some phytopharmaceutical products, they have more problem growing canola. And probably there's an opportunity for Canada here. And although when the canola is exported to the EU, the exporters, they have to prove that some environmental conditions were met so that this canola can be used into biofuels in the EU. And I must say that canola exports to France especially, they have grown more than 100% this year, the nine first years of 2020 compared to last year. So it could be a major opportunity for canola, even in the years to come. So to the next slide. Requirements remain the same for shipments to the EU, and this is a short list of requirements. For meat products, the meat must come from a federally registered establishment, and this one must be approved by the EU. And the EU list of approved establishment is quite short, I must say, because there are special requirements. And for other products, it's easier. It's fruit, vegetable, maple products. It just needs to come from a registered establishment in Canada, but it doesn't need to be listed with the EU. Then for some products like meats and live plants, you need a CFI export health certificate or phytosanitary certificate. For seafood products, you need a catch certificate in addition to the health certificate. For meat products, you need to prove, and this is done through international agreements, that the meat is hormone-free. And in pork, well, I know it's the case for pork, but in the past it was not. Also, it has to be ractopamine-free to be exported to the EU, but it's the same for China anyway. Then when it comes to a consumer product, there's a lot of labeling constraints. In fact, basically, labeling rules are not the same as in Canada. So any label has to be kind of reshuffled to change a little bit the presentation and to change the way the nutrition information, for example, is presented. And last but not least, the MRLs and contaminants. These are, especially for commodities, these are limits they are to be met absolutely. So now with these requirements, maybe go to the next slide. And well, we've had some successes, and we have cheese, for example, was exported to France last year. We have this new fruit, Camerise, which other name is Asca, and it also been exported to France last year. It's a very good fruit, by the way. And exports are up in 2019 versus the year before, and again in 2020 versus 2019, and especially this year, 2020, exports are up probably 30% or 25% overall to the EU. And also we've had a major investment by some European ingredient manufacturers in Canada. So Canada is an appealing place for European investments, especially in the ingredient sector. So if we go to the next slide, as I said, but we've been through these opportunities before, but just want to mention, beside commodities, with the ingredients and especially the fruit, pet foods is another opportunity, and we've seen exports growing significantly. Processed foods and especially beers. We have maybe some potential for dairy products. There's a lot of potential for seafood, and we're still in the middle of the phasing in time period for processed lobster. And for meat, well, in fact, we had duty-free access since 2013 for beef meat, we've not enjoyed exactly a major growth even since 2013. And the first 2 years of CETA were kind of disappointing for meat. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to talk about events that are usually very interesting for. So to the next slide. Yes, these events, well, we have Agriculture Canada is organizing the Canadian presence through a national pavilion at major events such as CL, Seafood Export, Global, and BioFar. But have been cancelled, and BioFar being even next year, BioFar in February is cancelled. SEG probably won't happen too. Anuga, which is a major show for processed products, could take place because it's in the second part of 2021. So this is to be confirmed. And through participation to these trade shows, I would say exporters, they have they'll receive a great help to find new customers in Europe. And it's waiting for these events to come back. Efforts to maintain trade relations and reach out to customers has been undertaken by Canadian companies, on a one-to-one basis. This is the end of my presentation, and I think the floor is now to Ms. Letourneau of the company Fruits d'Or.
Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Anne Letourneau. I'm the Vice President of Sales for the Ingredient Division at Fruits d'Or. Fruits d'Or is a Canadian, Quebec company established 20 years ago. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year. We are very proud to be the largest supplier of cranberries from Canada. So if you want to change the slide, please. Next slide. So few facts on Fruits d'Or. So Fruits d'Or was, like I say, it's a family company founded 20 years ago by Martin Lemoine, his wife, and 2 other producers of cranberries. We are located in the center of Quebec, close to Quebec City, at 30 minutes from Quebec City. It's in the centre du Quebec. It's a very nice area to grow cranberries because the soil is very acidic. And we have a lot of water that we need to harvest it, not to grow it, but to harvest the cranberry. We need a lot of water. We started as an organic supplier, and currently we are completely integrated from the farm to the table, and we have 60% of the world organic supply of cranberries. We're exporting in 65 countries around the world, and I will say that Europe, Western Europe, is the largest one for us right now. Second slide. Couple of years ago, unfortunately, Fruits d'Or has a big fire, but it was also an opportunity to rebuild and invest a lot of money. So we built a completely new factory in 9 months. We invest $40 million US dollar to rebuild a new factory. So we have now a state-of-the-art factory and it's helped us to develop a lot of market. Phase 2, because everything is going well, considering the pandemic, but everything is going well. So we're investing another $15 million US to increase our production capacity. So we will have additional volume and new volume spring 2021. Next slide. Food safety, but you mentioned it, Yannick. We need to follow all the regulation. So Fruits d'Or, the European market is a tough market. So if you are able to sell in Western Europe, you will be able to sell everywhere else in the world. So we have a good team of people who are taking care of food safety measure regulation, and for all the products that we're selling, so the frozen, the dry, the juice, and everything. And it's mandatory to have a good team like this to do business. So next slide, please. Fruit d'Or is, like I mentioned, and completely integrated from farm to table. We are the largest producer of cranberries in Canada. And for wild blueberries, we are the third largest in Canada. So we are exporting these two products into Europe and other countries in different types of products. So we're selling dry fruits. We're selling also juice, concentrate. We have a division of nutraceutical and cosmetic. So we're selling product like cranberry seed oil. We're selling powder for the nutraceutical division. So we are using everything that we can, everything that it's possible to do with a cranberry or a blueberry, a wild blueberry. We're doing it, and we're selling it as ingredient. Can you go to the next slide, please? It's the product that I mentioned, juice, concentrate, puree, and other fruit. Next slide. For us, CITA was a very, very good thing. I started with Fruit d'Or 3 years ago, exactly 1 week before the CITA was in action, and as you can see, we're talking about 27% increase in 3 years. So for us, it's very, very good. This is for the cranberry, but we have the same or similar result for the wild blueberries, frozen, and also the dry. If you can put the second slide, yeah. So positive impact for us on all the products. We are, like I mentioned, 27% for Fruit d'Or for the cranberries, and the wild blueberries, we were talking about 50% growth in terms of volume. We were able to increase our distribution in more countries, and following that, we had the partner over there called Berico for many, many years, but we decided to do a company with them. So we founded a company, and Fruit d'Or is now 49% owner and Berico 51%. So it's all the positive impact of the CITA for us. Next slide. So I asked Berico to give me just one slide presentation and tell me what was positive for them. So it give us the opportunity to be the second supplier for cranberries. So we are now well established versus the American as the second supplier of cranberries in Western Europe. Canadian cranberries are on the map because of the CITA. Yes, can be sold. Benchmark product quality, benchmark farming practice, shorter transit time. The fact that Fruit d'Or is close to the port of Montreal also helped to export. The saving of 17.6% duty on the cranberries and also the concentrate help us very much, very, very much. And other positive impact, everything related to administrative handling and paperwork, and we're now in 27 countries. So it was very, very positive for us. Next slide. I think I'm almost done. Yes. So for us, taking care of our fruit and our partner is achieved through a multitude of small equality important action. And all the little details make us better. So thank you.
We have to switch to Maximo Hurtado right now.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the Spanish market. Because Spain was a little bit peculiar when it comes to CITA. You've seen that in some European countries they were a little bit reticent about ratification of the agreement, And Spain was actually the first large EU economy to ratify CETA, and they did it pretty early in December 2017. It's a country that just like Canada, it believes in trade. It believes in progressive trade relations as a source of prosperity. We in Canada tend to believe in trade, and it's two countries that have very much things in common, values and common principles. It's something that our colleagues from the political section usually say, and frankly, I think that is not a cliche. So I'm here to talk about Spain as an option, and as a new market that maybe it's not what Canadian companies have in mind when they think about exporting to the EU. In this slide, you can see ratification. There's Canada, there's Spain, and ratification. There was nothing like a somewhere over the rainbow or l'avion rose after CETA was ratified and tariffs were removed. With the agreement, the bilateral trade relationship did enter into a new chapter, but CETA was not the goal. The message that I want to transmit is that CETA was just the beginning. After ratification, there comes implementation. We've seen in Yannick's presentation that many tariffs have been removed or are about to be removed, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Companies still need to research the market. They need to adapt the products. They need to work on marketing campaigns. They need to find the right importers and distributors. They need to go to trade shows and so on. The good news, next please. The good news is that for Canadian SMEs is that once they've been able to access one European market, they can sell into any other European country. And to do so, they have the support. We see a trade show in Vigo in the image. They have the support of a large network of trade commissioners. They have the provincial governments helping. They have the AFC, other government agencies like ADC. And I'm pretty sure that during these 3 days of this seminar of the summit, you've learned about programs like CanExport that can assist companies. So my main message here is that after ratification, there comes implementation, and if you work diligently, the TCS is here to support you. We're here to assist you in trying to solve market access problems. And you know, if you contacts in order to help you and try to solve so do contact us. Next slide, please. So why do we think that it's worth putting in the effort, and why Spain? Next slide, please. Again, Spain isn't usually your first stop in Europe, but I'm pretty sure that you've heard many STCs saying and talking about the importance of trade diversification. Basically, do not put all your eggs in just one basket. Some ideas about the market, you can read them. Spain is the fourth largest economy in the EU. When the UK, with Brexit, it's going to become more and more important. It's the 11th largest importer of agri-food products. And with a population of 47, plus in the pre-COVID days, we had between 70 and 80 million tourists. And it's something that probably Yannick doesn't even know, but we get more visitors than France. And Spain is the EU's largest importer of fish and seafood products. And as we've seen before, this is one of the opportunities for Canadian exporters. Next slide, please. Some words about the Spanish consumers. Spaniards spent almost 70 million in food in 2019. As you can see, mostly it's done at home. We've been monitoring during COVID, and actually during confinement, consumption at home grew. And there's a direct proportion between restrictions and consumption at home. So the more restrictions, the more consumption that you get at home. But Spaniards also like to go out a lot. And that's where most of the spending actually takes place, in restaurants and bars and cafeterias. Just a few ideas that you're gonna see why. Spaniards, each Spaniard eats 45 kilos of meat per year, and about 22.5, 25 kilos of fish and seafood. And that's a product that Canada can export to the country. There's also some products that we produce in Canada and that's typical of the Mediterranean diet, like pulses. And Spain, obviously, it's one country in the Western world and follows the same trends. And they not only drink, they not only eat, but they also drink. And they drink a lot. And the main products are beers, wines, and spirits, and it's done in that order. Next slide, please. So where does Canada fit in this picture? Basically, we have many products that Spain demands, and in some cases with the type of quality, like meat, marbled meat, that Spaniards like. We have products that Spain needs to import because they cannot satisfy them with the local production or catches, and over 90% are free of tariffs. Next, please. I'm going to talk briefly about two CETA success stories. One is about Canadian beef, and it's happened this week. When we started talking about CETA and the quota, we came up with a 3-year plan. In short, there was a mission coming from the Canadian Cattlemen's Association to the country. Then we sent a mission of importers to Canada to learn about how everything was produced and to make initial contact. There was one importer that was interested. Then they came back. We continued working with Canada Beef and AFC and our partners. We found a Spanish distributor with a distribution network, and this week, actually yesterday, we were able to find Canadian beef at Costco, Spain, and it's a major success story for us. The second one is fish and seafood. Again, lobster, the exports of lobster to Spain have been growing at a double digit. And I'm going to give you one example of one company that came to Consumer in Vigo. Spain was not part of their market, and now after coming to the show, Spain is the third most important export market for that company based in New Brunswick. Next, please. Finally, I'm going to talk about one initiative that we've launched today, so you can access the websites now. What we're trying to do is bring together European importers of Canadian food products. So we try to connect European importers of Canadian food products with other importers and distributors across Europe. We think that this will allow more Canadian agri-food companies to sell in Europe with order sizes imposing less of a barrier. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of companies in Spain. We have a company like Grupaz. They are importing Canadian craft beer from 30 microbreweries in Canada. And from their imports in Spain, they're distributing it to other places in Europe. So it's good that a company in, let's say, Austria knows that there's a Spanish importer importing beers from Canada. Another example is Taste of America. They were interested in buying Moosehead beer. Moosehead beers from New Brunswick, and they reach out to the importer located in Germany, and now they're bringing and distributing it in Spain. So that's why we think that we need to bring together, and distributors in European countries need to know that there's companies already importing Canadian products in the EU. So if your European importer is not on the website, please ask that person to contact us, and we'll be delighted to include the company. Next, please. Thank you very much, and we will be more than happy to help you in your adventure in the European market.
So we're back together. Exactly. Maybe to answer a few questions that have been sent to the email. And I see there's a question about private labels and what kind of help can we give Canadian companies that want to sell private labels in the EU. Most of the issue with the question labels, private labels, is kind of difficult because it is very difficult for a Canadian company to sell a product under private label to European retail company. First, why is it so? It's because a retail company will consider a private label after a few years of a kind of regular supplying. So you cannot come up to a European retailer and say you want to sell a private label. You have to be able to show that you've been already supplying that kind of product for several years in the European market. And second, European retailers, they ask for specific certifications for these private label products. That these certifications are called BRC for most of what is sold in the UK, and also part of what is sold in France, for example. And the second certification is called IFS. They're very close to GFSI, that is very common in Canada. They're not exactly the same. These are kind of small variations based on the GFSI. And I must say that retailers ask for these certifications. You cannot sell a private label that is not certified under either BRC or IFS. And second, well, find a retailer, as I said, you must first establish a kind of regular relations with this retailer before hoping to sell a product under private label. And this would be, for example, a maple syrup, for example. If there is maple syrup sold under private label in France, but it is a kind of, after several years of supplying this product, then you can sell it under the retailer's name. Maybe Anna Tourneau, maybe you may have some kind of comments to my answer.
But we're not selling on private label right now. We're mainly ingredient, and we don't want to compete our clients. So we're not doing private label.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're a little bit running over time, so we have to give back the screen to the next table. And thank you. We remain available for those who want to ask questions. My name and Maximo can be found very easily on LinkedIn. So you can send us some questions. There's no doubt we get some questions through LinkedIn on a regular basis. So it will be another flow of questions, and we'll be very pleased to answer these. Thank you.